Welcome to the webinar. This is our first Me Country Life Summer Series webinar titled Don't Leave Money on the Table, Put Your Tax Dollars to Work for You instead of letting somebody else spend them for you. And Me Country Life is a consulting company that does bilingual specialization as well as operations improvement. We follow lean principles. Who are we? I'm going to let Jessica introduce herself.
My name is Jessica Duran, and I am a doctor of veterinary medicine. I graduated in Mexico, and I have an extensive experience with all aspects of dairy operations. I have worked with small, big, organic, conventional farms, and even with dairies with robotic milkers.
Kathy Malone, I'm your presenter. I'm an environmental engineer and lean solution architect with more than 40 years of experience. My experience was in manufacturing, but I also have had a horse farm for 30 years and I've been composting the whole time. And I rode with a food animal vet for several years, background in that side of the industry. So, what is NextCycle Michigan? And it's the reason that we accelerated this webinar series because I attended the Michigan Sustainability Conference, which was June 2nd to 4th, and they had a presentation about NextCycle Michigan. And actually, one of the deadlines closed the day of their presentation on Friday, June 4th. And I actually put in an application for flows at that point in time. But we looked at the micros, which I'll talk a little bit more about what the details of those are in just a couple minutes. Flows is actually more of a business accelerator program. Micros, they actually give you grants up to $10,000 to do something now. It's the only part of the NextCycle Michigan program where you get cash. And right now, micros, the RIT, which is innovative technology, just opened a couple days ago, and we'll see the deadlines for that. So how I found out about it, as I just said, is the Michigan Sustainability Conference. When you get the slides, if you send us an email or request it in the chat, we'll send you the slides. And that gives you, you can re-listen to that presentation, or if you just search for the EAGLE, EGLE, which stands for Environmental Great Lakes Energy, Michigan Sustainability Conference, you'll get connected to those presentations. The NextCycle one is afternoon of the third day, June 4th, Friday. There's also a good presentation, A20 on the first day, which is about Ann Arbor's sustainability project and their goal to hit zero, to be net zero by 2030. And they're making all their resources for that available to anybody who wants them. What are these micros grants? They're up to $10,000 for innovative waste reduction and recycling programs. And Jessica and I have been brainstorming what those might look like for dairy. And we'd love to have you put in the chat what are some of the innovative programs for small, innovative waste reduction and recycling projects that you might be interested in doing. We actually, I'm going to take a side road here for just a minute because we're rolling through the slides in good order, is one of the things that we talk about in lean is how you improve things. And there's a book called One Small Step Can Change Your Life. That's a very good book on Kaizen, which is good micro change. Lean is full of jargon, and I always try to de-jargonize it. So good micro change. And it says the mind cannot refuse a question. If you keep asking your brain questions over and over again, it comes up with answers. So my question for this one is, what's a small, innovative waste reduction and recycling project for dairy? And I've been noodling that one around, and Jessica and I have been kicking that around here for a while. And we've got some suggestions that we think are good starts, and we'd love to hear what your suggestions are. The deadline for the Micros grant application is July 2021. And then the award is in August or September 22nd, 21, and the award would be in October. So these are grants where you put in the grant application and you could actually have them agree to send you money fairly quickly, which is quite nice. How do I apply for the Micros grant? When you go to that NextCycle website, NextCycle Michigan website, you'll see innovation projects. It'll take you to the Micros grant and you can pull down the application packet. The application itself is online and the application is quite easy. Unlike a lot of grant proposals that are a gazillion pages, this one you have 4 key questions you have to answer, and we'll go through those briefly later in the podcast webinar. So if we talk about brainstorming, what are some possible projects? And as I think about the dairy farm, there are several components to that. So one option is water reduction. And water reduction doesn't seem as important to us in Michigan because we have lots of water. But nitrate contamination of groundwater is a big problem. So projects that might help re-divert or test the application of manure to land. So Internet of Things testing for how much liquid manure are we applying to the soil so that we can better manage that so it stays in the root zone and doesn't wind up in groundwater. How can we maybe, water meters are now very inexpensive. Without water meters, you don't know where you can divert water to get the most benefit out of what you're trying to do. And what I'm told is $25 installed for a water meter. And that would now connect to your phone. And one of the principles for water reduction is always to separate the most concentrated water from the more dilute water, because you pay by the gallon to treat water. And the more dilute it is, the harder it is to treat. So water reduction programs that might explore those possibilities. These are possible innovative suggestions. One of the other things I was told is that a lot of dairies they just throw their cardboard out in the trash. And it might be possible to do a composting project where you would use the cardboard for the solids for your, to provide the carbon and dry matter for your compost, that you could use liquid manure. Probably the amount of cardboard you had would be the rate limiting step. So to set up a pilot to test actually using your cardboard so that you can compost, that gives you a more direct soil amendment instead of the liquid manure that gets land applied. It means you can apply more. It's more beneficial to the soil. It helps with water retention. It helps with weed management and adds some useful nutrients to the soil without burning it. So those are examples of a couple projects. Anything to do with Internet of Things where you're putting sensors in would probably be a project that would qualify for the Micros grant. What the ones that they have in their packet, they use the example that a local hauler and city staff partner to apply for funds for marketing materials to grow a composting collection system. Lean farming, a nonprofit applies for funding for equipment to operate a local food rescue program. And lean farming is interesting. There's a really good book, The Lean Farm, and my public library made that one available to me free by audiobook on Hoopla, which is the app that they use for their library projects. Not only did it have a really good presentation of lean, the principles, it was excellent in terms of how it integrated that to farm operations and had some suggestions. I try to think pretty creatively, and there were several that I had never thought of. And that the Lean Farm book, the question is, what are they do an organic vegetable farm and produce farm. And they started, their farm is on 5 acres, and they originally started farming 3 acres, and then they cut it down to 2 acres, and now 1 acre and they are making a living. They don't have to keep a second job in town with their lean farm with the practices they've implemented. So for my horse farm, I implemented lean principles and I was able to reduce the cost of running my farm by 90%. And that was over the course of probably several years, but it also happened more by accident than by design. I mean, we knew we were trying to reduce costs, but we didn't have a good idea of the best way to go about figuring out how to do that. And these micros grant give you the opportunity to use $10,000 of Eagle's money to go explore those possibilities. So we'd love to see what your suggestions are for these small, innovative waste reduction and recycling projects. What they say, now I'm going to pull in some material from the actual application packet to give you some words. And the projects and material streams, it says any project that directly or indirectly improves collecting, processing, minimizing, reusing, composting, or recycling of Michigan waste materials. So probably what I'll do after this webinar is actually take each of those words and write them down separately and then try and come up with ideas for each of those particular things that I could be doing. And projects that are eligible include that materials classified as solid waste. And I'm going to give you the EPA definition of solid waste because it's so interesting. It's any solid, liquid, semi-solid, or contained gaseous material. So solid waste is not what you think it is. Solid waste is anything that is discarded and doesn't have a reuse. And recyclables and organics, and heavy energy liquids such as brewery byproducts, concentrated milk, water from rinsing operations might fall into that category. And one of the other interesting stats, there's a food waste webinar that Eagle put on about an innovative, possibly disruptive piece of technology to take food waste from food waste to a soil amendment. The state of Ohio has actually certified it as fertilizer in 24 hours, as opposed to composting typically takes 3 months or 6 months or a year. And we will put that link in the presentation so that you can go watch that. It'll be in the resources section. And what's interesting about that was one of the stats is that 38% of all food waste winds up in landfills. And not only is that a horrible use of our landfills, but it's a horrible use of a potential resource that could be a soil amendment and could be enriching our soils. When I first got my horse farm 30 years ago, I went to a bunch of composting conferences. And at that time, the city of Miami, where I actually grew up, was composting all of their municipal solid waste. They just had all the garbage trucks come in, dump the waste on the tipping floor, separated out the refrigerators, and composted everything else. It was a very interesting project because they had forgotten rule number 2 of all farms, which is that water flows downhill. And if you give water a place to go, it can be your friend. And if you don't plan for water to flow downhill, and it does, it can be a problem. So their entire composting facility was below grade. And when they got heavy rain events, it was a serious problem. But the interesting thing about this with respect to soil was, as you may know, they grow a lot of produce in Florida, like tomatoes grow year round. A lot of things are grown year round. And the soil is such horrible, it's sugar sand. It has no nutrient value at all. So the growers would take as much compost as could be generated because it added some nutrients to the soil. They didn't care that it was contaminated with glass and plastic. But another project that would be potential for micros funding, I think, is if you're composting on your farm, you have the ability to quality control the end product because you have the ability to control the contaminants. And Milorganite, next time you're in Home Depot, go check and see how much money they get for Milorganite. I think when I checked the other day, it's $36 for a 40-pound bag. So if you generate quality compost on your farm, you could make that available to the community and even potentially turn that into a source of revenue, especially if you have any farm store on your property where you sell to the public. Let's go back because I didn't finish this one. Another project and material stream that's valid is that projects related to combustion of municipal solid waste for energy are not eligible. So wouldn't apply to you guys anyway. And along the entire waste stream are eligible, including upstream, your waste reduction, downstream, using recycled materials. And breaks all our heart, the minimum project size is $2,500. So you have to ask for at least $2,500. I can't imagine not asking for the full $10,000. Eligible uses of project funding. I'll go through these real quickly because I'm not sure you'll be able to read them very well, but equipment and materials. So marketing and collateral. So if you generate something at your farm that's currently being wasted that you could now market on the outside, you could apply for the funding to come up with marketing materials. And of course, your project can be a combination of these things. Your project and market feasibility analysis. So it's valid to pay for consultants to help you figure out how much you could charge, for example, for that on-farm compost. You might be able to find a local farm. We're getting more and more small local community farms, or maybe even a community project garden like the city of Detroit, who might be able to market it for you. The salary of people associated with working on this project is a valid expense that can be charged to the grant. Consulting and assistance with legal services. If you're going to sell that compost, you probably want to know what requirements that comes under. Prototype and lab testing, testing the compost, for example, for its nutrient value. And project-related event and meeting space rental. If you're having a public hearing to explain this out to the community, or if you've pulled in a community group and you want to hold it at a nice little hotel in town, the rental of that room would be valid. And project-related travel and lodging, if I go to look at a farm somewhere else that's doing what I want to do, so I can figure out if it applies to my farm, that would be valid. Now that would eat up $10,000 pretty quickly. I'd rather use it on my farm than use a lot of travel expenses. If we go to the project narrative, now I'm going to very briefly go through the questions that you actually have to answer. All the other stuff is fill in the blanks, like what's your address, who are you, who's the project manager going to be, what's your phone number. Come up with a creative project title, and then there are four other questions that you need to answer. I would put it in a different order than I thought it would. And we'll go through each of those one at a time. And those are the main meat of the questions, and bless their hearts, they made them short. They didn't want to have to review too much. So you've got two 200-word responses, a 150-word response, and a 300-word response, and you're done with the hard part of the project plan. So part B, A was the title, come up with something creative and catchy. And then B is the project plan in 200 words or less. And the way I like to do responses to grants is in the application package, you'll see each of these questions is just mashed together in a paragraph. But people who are evaluating these things, you never know which is going to be their hot button. So I like to actually take each sentence that they're asking and answer each question separately. A lot of times what I'll do first, though, is I will write my answer to what I think the project plan is first, and then I'll go look at the questions they asked and fill in the blanks with additional details so that every question they might have about it has an answer in my 200 words. So in this case, for the project plan, what's the proposed project? What materials or waste streams is the project addressing? So if we talk about our using cardboard to increase the ability to compost some of our liquid manure, the materials or waste streams would be cardboard and liquid manure. How will the venture operate? We're going to build a contained, covered, separate from the ground, test pilot box that we can test this compost in. We're going to use cinder blocks, which we can get from Habitat Restore for 50 cents each if we don't have a bunch of them on site. I think they're $2.50 at Home Depot. We're going to get the cheapest portable carport we can get to cover it. That should be about $100. We're going to put a tarp down and cardboard over the top of it to separate us from the groundwater, and that should give us our pilot compost bin. What inputs will we use? Here we'd say where we're collecting the liquid manure from, and that we're using all the cardboard and paper materials on the farm that are currently going to landfill. What product am I making? I'm making a usable soil amendment. I don't use the word fertilizer because that requires testing, and I don't use the word compost because compost has standards. And then how will the product improve the supply chain? It pulls out my liquid manure so that I'm creating a more value-added product that has better soil amendment value, and improves the supply chain because that cardboard that's currently driving to a landfill is no longer generating the CO2 emissions, the carbon footprint of the truck that hauls it to the landfill. And typically transportation is 2/3 of the carbon footprint of a process. And what is my plan for becoming economically viable and sustainable? I'm currently paying to have that cardboard hauled off. And if I can sell it to the public, that gives me a source of revenue. It's something I'm already paying to process. It actually should cost me less to process it than it currently is. And if it's a more valuable soil amendment than the liquid manure, that's beneficial to my fields. I may be able to use it on my own fields with less transportation. And compost is typically a 70% volume reduction, so I won't use as much fuel taking it out to the field to spread it. On to the next question, and we're almost out of time, is question C. But you get a sense of how I go through these questions. So statement of need, again, only 200 words. And you heard me say a lot more than 200 words in the previous section. So part of the longest part of these things is you write down what you want to say, and then you have to chop it. You have to reduce the number of words. Identify the issue or need your project seeks to address, which is disposal of liquid manure in a way that makes it a more beneficial soil amendment, and finding a beneficial reuse for my cardboard instead of putting it in a landfill. What's the goal? To demonstrate what the optimum mix is, how much cardboard and other paper waste we generate, and how much liquid manure that means that we can divert. And if accepted into the micros track, how will the funding help the team achieve that goal? It's going to pay for us to build that little compost bin. It's going to pay us for some compost temperature thermometer testing, Internet of Things, ideally, that'll send it to our phone. It'll pay for testing of the end product to see how it stacks up in nutrient-wise. And then for D, the impact potential. How does the project address recycling, reusing? And you'll hear that we're using the same words and phrases over and over in answering some of these questions. How does it address recycling, reusing, composting? We answered that already. How does it impact equity? Landfills are typically disproportionately located near to economically and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. So by us reducing the amount of landfill space we use, and also the emissions from the vehicles, diesel typically going down the highways to take those materials to landfill, we're reducing that. Are there economic impacts? We've already talked about that. And what other environmental impacts does your project have, such as greenhouse gas emission? They've shown that composting is actually less greenhouse gas emissions than liquid manure spreading. And what are the short and long, the impact metrics? This one's only 150 words. And how will the key thing here is how will the progress towards these goals be measured? And that's where we use some of the Internet of Things testing items that we incorporate in the project. And the goals, here's where I would say this is what we're going to do first, this is what we're going to do second, and this is when we're going to finish it up. And that's only 150 words. So, wrapping things up, there are other potential sources of funding. I'll put some links to that in the notes, but we are 25 minutes in, so I've already taken 5 minutes of the Q&A time. And any questions, we are scheduling office hours on Friday from noon to 5 to, if people are interested in actually filling out a Micros application, we will assign you a time slot and we can talk you through your application if you haven't started it. And if you've already started it, we can review what you've got and make suggestions about how to tailor that to what we think the people reviewing the application might want. Any questions, send them to Gary@mecountrylife.com. That's M-I, Country Life as in Michigan, and also as in Me Country Life, Mi Casa es su casa, because we do extensive translation from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. So Spanish as a second language for the management of your dairy farm, we can help you better communicate with your team. Thank you for attending the webinar, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and email us for a copy of the presentation. Again, Dairy, D-A-I-R-Y, at Me Country Life, M-I, Country, C-O-U-N-T-R-Y, life, L-I-F-E.com. Thanks again. Bye now.